Welcome back to another episode of Thinking Critically. Today I am joined by Daniel Betts from Daniel Betts Comedy. He is an old friend of mine from school, way back in the day, it seems like now. And since then, he's gone on to found his own comedy brand. He does stand-up events. He travels around, has done shows for for veterans overseas. Anyway, Dan, thank you so much for agreeing to come on. And how are you?
I'm good, man. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. It's gonna be fun. It's good to see your face. It's been a while. It's good to chat with you. And I gotta say, I'm a huge fan of what you're doing, of your Facebook posts, of the website, your podcast, Thinking Critically in general, as well as Thinking Critically, your brand. So I'm excited to not only see a friend, but engage in what it is that you're doing, because I'm a big fan of it. So.
Well, I certainly appreciate the support, and it is great to connect because it's been a while. It's been a long time. It's been years. How long? So you're in California. How long have you been in California now?
I started coming out here on and off for work. I would do kind of a rotational schedule. I'd do 28 days on, 12 days off. And I started doing that in maybe 2010 or so. And I moved here to accept a full-time job for good in summer of 2012. So we're coming up on 8 years that I've been living here permanently.
Oh my goodness. I'm trying to think about how long I know you, like when we first met. And I think it was my first semester in graduate school, which would have been fall of 2007, I think.
Yeah, 07 I think would be my guess too. So over a decade.
Oh my goodness, it's been a long time. So yeah, in geology. That's when I was still in geology.
Yeah, you're a good geologist.
I was a decent geologist.
No, you're a good geologist. You're a good geologist and a good physicist, right?
Well, I like to think so.
Yeah, a good student.
Yeah, very good. So geology. Okay, so we met in geology school essentially. So you have a background in science, and then you ended up going into the oil field, right? So you currently work for, is it Chevron?
I would have probably left the name out, but that's fine. No problem at all. You don't have to edit that. I usually I leave. I make no qualms about the fact that I work for oil and gas, but because I do stand up and I'm on stage, and I'll say things that are maybe something that my employer would maybe not be through. I've never had an issue, but in general, as a good practice, I leave it out. But yeah, I mean, I work at Chevron. I've been there since 2012.
Okay. Well, I can go back and edit that out.
Not a problem at all. No, leave it in. Leave it in.
Leave it in. Okay. Anyway, okay, yeah. So you work in the oil and gas, or I should say mostly just gas field. And you have a background in science.
Yes,
and
sir.
So at some point you decided that you wanted to get into stand-up comedy, and I'm curious how that came about, because I mean you've always been the funny guy, right. Going out, cracking jokes, things of that nature. But I'm just curious as to how you decided to make the leap into comedy. Because I remember having a very we hung out and we had a lengthy conversation right before you were thinking about making the leap. You had just moved to California permanently, like a year or two prior. I think this was summer 2014-ish, or summer 2014. And you were looking at things to do because I think you wanted to do like a side gig, because you had your primary source of income, like your primary job, and then you were looking to kind of like expand upon that. And you were showing me these like decal things that you were thinking about getting into. Do you know what I'm talking about? How it was like dipping like car parts in order to like decal them. It wasn't quite painting, but it was
hydro dipping.
That's it, hydro dipping. You were showing me something like that, and then you also told me about comedy. And I was like, dude, you have to do comedy.
Right. The hydro dipping, why would you even be considering that?
I think it was probably popular in the area of California that you find yourself in, but
I went down a YouTube rabbit hole on that one. I'm always interested in something, right? I've considered owning a bar. I looked into that. I thought it was pretty cool. At some point, I was looking at like the inflatables thing, like bounce houses and stuff for
Okay.
kids. My nephews were going to one pretty regularly, so my brother-in-law and I looked into doing that. But yeah, comedy was. I had been thinking about doing it for so many years, and it's funny. Since I've started doing comedy, there's two things that have kind of popped out of my mind that I remember now. One is I remember in fourth grade, I was like the class clown. I was goofing off in class, and I was kind of distracting all the other students and kind of making it hard for the teacher to teach and whatever. And I distinctly remember her pulling me aside and having this sort of a come to Jesus moment of like, Dan, like, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I remember how it played out then. It didn't make sense to me until I was older. It stood out in my mind as significant and as sort of odd, but it didn't make sense to me until many years later. So she asked me this question, and I'm sure she was expecting me to say, I want to be an astronaut, I want to be a fighter pilot, whatever. And at which point then she'd be able to hit me with that gotcha line that she's probably practiced 1,000 times with other kids with 100% success rate, where she goes, well, then you're going to have to get good grades to be an astronaut. You know what I mean? Like, in other words, shut up and pay attention. And I said, I want to be a stand-up comedian. And I remember her face with this like, shit, like this isn't going to work the way I wanted it to on this kid. There was this moment of like, then keep doing what you're doing, I guess, because this is, but I didn't remember why that was significant. I didn't know at the time. I was too young. And then years later, I was like, oh my God, now I know why she looked at me like that, right? So I remember that. And I remember when I was a kid, my dad took my brother and I to this like kind of bar and grill, if you will, a bunch of times one summer. And it didn't make any sense to me then. My brother reminded me, since I've been doing stand-up, that they had an open mic. They had a comedy open mic there. And he was going to the open mics, and he was trying to expose me to this. And I remember him even trying to convince me to go get on stage. And I must have been like, somewhere between like 7 and 10. And I remember thinking, like, I can't get up there and do that. Like, yeah, I can make you guys giggle, but I don't have like prepared material. I can't go and do what they do. So anyway, fast forward to, I had always wanted to do this. But the story that I equated to was, if you're a fan at all of like the UFC, the president, Dana White, had been asked for years when he was going to have that guy Kimbo Slice in the UFC. And he was like, never. He's the toughest guy at your backyard barbecue, but he's not a mixed martial artist. And that was what stopped me from doing it. I thought, well, I might be the funny guy at a backyard barbecue party with a bunch of attorneys and accountants, but am I funny enough to do it on stage? And that thinking always prevented me from doing it. So anyway, long story short, I have a buddy that owns a bar, and he just hit me up one day, and he was like, hey man, we got a comedy show tonight at 7:30. You're opening up. You got 5 minutes up top. I'll see you then. And it was like 5:30 p.m. So I got my voicemail. I called him back. I was like, hey dude, you're out of your mind. There's no way I'm doing this. He said, well, you said you've always wanted to do it, and I saw that you had material in your phone. I said, no, I showed you premises, like ideas of things that I could turn into material. And he was like, you'll be here or you won't. So I showed up. I did 5 minutes. It actually went pretty well, which is a little bit atypical. Most people bomb. Not that I haven't since, but I did my 5, and then the rest is history. I was open micing and performing and writing ever since. And then that got into producing shows and hosting them and booking them and promoting them and everything else. So anyway, long story short, right?
No, that's a great story. That's so cool that you have that. So that time from childhood when your teacher pulls you outside of the classroom. I mean, that's fantastic. And you knew right then and there that kind of what you wanted to do was you wanted to do stand-up comedy, because that's kind of what you were passionate about, was making people laugh. That's way too funny.
I just liked making people laugh, plain and simple. Yeah. And I still do.
I can totally relate. 3rd grade, I essentially lived outside of my classroom because I was a class clown, and because I was just bored in school. I was bored with all the material, and I thought distracting other people and making them laugh actually entertained me, because I didn't like the material. But I lived outside because my teacher would put me outside of the classroom all day. So I can totally relate to having the teacher pull you aside and reprimand you for being a bit of a class clown.
Yeah,
But
and I think in your case, probably you weren't even probably challenged enough, maybe. And I think that was a little bit of it for me too. Not that I'm some savant or some genius, but the material just wasn't challenging. And I think even the style of teaching didn't engage me. I think that's been my fascination with science, right? Is if you're a sort of this naturally curious person and you have this sort of thirst for knowledge and a thirst for answers, that's where science sort of engages that part of my brain. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah, that is interesting that you also have this science aspect to you. I mean, I've always viewed a lot of the comics, like some of the brightest comics out there. I'm not talking about, well, I mean, even the ones that make stupid jokes like Larry the Cable Guy. But I've always
Right.
thought of comics as being actually quite intelligent because you have to sit there. And the same thing goes with some of the brightest like rappers and hip hop artists out there, because you have this creativity side of you where your brain is working overtime and you kind of have to manufacture all of these things. And I know you have some preset material before you go out there, but then you don't ever know how the audience is going to react.
Right.
You kind of have to feel them out with the way you give punchlines, and then I'm assuming you have to adapt to that. So and then having to create new material too. You can't do the same material forever. But yeah, so when did you first become interested in science? Because obviously you have a bachelor's degree in geology, so that's a science. When did that all come about?
I think, I mean, for one thing, I think I was always kind of interested in it. I was never a good student. My entire life, I was never a good student. I just always found classrooms boring. I'm probably a bit of an ADHD poster child. And I think people have mixed views on ADHD, like they do right now about coronavirus, for instance, right? And everywhere on that spectrum, you know. But there's one thing that they'll kind of say about people with ADHD is that there's this ability to hyper focus. And so you can't keep my attention for more than 20 minutes in a classroom setting, right? But if I'm planning a snowboarding trip or I'm working on comedy material or these other sorts of things or science that would engage me well enough, it's like I could really kind of lock in on it. And I remember that fairly young. There was just something interesting. It was like, oh, I'm learning how the planet works. I'm learning how Earth works. I'm understanding something as simple as like why eating a Tums helps with antacid. What's the chemical composition of that, right? Why does that work? So I always remember that, but really I was a terrible student all throughout high school. I did a semester of community college. No, I think a year of community college, and I was just sort of failing miserably at that. I joined the Navy. And when I got out, I had this sort of a renewed sense of what the purpose was for higher education. I went back to school, and it was actually an earth science class at College of DuPage at COD, and there was a professor there. I think retired shortly after the semester that I had him for, but his way of teaching science was, you know, it's like he was one of these guys that's been teaching for 35 years, and he knew it. He knew how to engage knuckleheads like me. He knew how to engage someone like me that was losing his attention span in the middle of class or whatever, and just had this way of teaching and explaining, and the visuals and the rocks and minerals and things that you could hold that really engaged my other senses a bit. And in fact, I remember in his class, if you were happy with your grade, you did. It was either if you were happy with your grade, you didn't have to take the final. No, I think if you were getting an A already in the class, you didn't have, or above a certain percentage or something, you didn't have to take the final. And so a couple days before the final, he kind of called out all the names of everybody that didn't have to take it. And then you could like skip the last week of that class, which was basically prep for the final, going over everything from that semester and prepping for the final. And he called out maybe 8 or 9 names, and everybody got up and they left. And he called my name. I didn't have to take the final, and I just stayed sitting there. And everybody looked at me like, what are you, out of your mind? Like, you don't have to be here. You're stuck in school. Like, it's like a jail cell. Get out of here. You're free. Yeah. But I just remember being like, yeah, but I like this. I'm interested. And at the time, by the way, I was a business and accounting major. And so that class is what changed me over to a geology major, actually. So I just stayed in the class. I was like, no, like, why would I leave? This is the most fascinating thing I've ever been a part of since I've been in school. And so I did one semester at NIU before officially switching over to geology.
That's fascinating. I mean, it's incredible to me how it appears as though just one particular course and one teacher influenced your entire career. Like just
Yeah.
one good teacher. I have a similar story with physics, but yeah, it's just incredible when you look back at kind of what you've taken, like education path or career path, how it could be just like one or two people that have more or less influenced the direction. I mean, it's probably not that limited, but if you look back at it, I mean, it's only a handful of people that have really influenced the direction of your life. And it's
Yeah.
incredible how impactful a teacher can be and why teaching is so important, right? Unfortunately, I get a feel for the current atmosphere, or the current climate, at least in the United States, is that teachers aren't as important.
Right.
They aren't valued as much as they should be. And I think your story, and I know at least my experience too, just kind of speaks volumes to how important having a good teacher is, and making sure that they feel comfortable, or that they don't have, they don't have to work multiple jobs outside of teaching in order to try to make ends meet, things of that nature, because they are incredibly valuable members of
Yeah.
society. But yeah, that's a really cool story. So
It,
geology, that was it. The one teacher at COD, and you were done.
it changed everything. I mean,
Yeah.
I certainly remember my science teachers in high school. I absolutely remember them. And I remember my science teacher in junior high even. And I remember getting my best grade, I think, in junior high science. And I wasn't a good student, but I really kicked ass at the labs. I'm a more hands-on learner, and science engages that, right? Whereas
Mhm.
like some of the other subjects just don't. It's sort of like, look at this, memorize it, pass the test, we get our funding, done. You know what I mean? Whereas like science, it was like, all right, man, let's light the Bunsen burner, and like let's get going.
Yeah.
And I was kicking ass in the labs alongside. I was leading the way on a lot of our labs compared to the kids who were the A students. They couldn't put it into practice. And I
Okay.
remember the same thing on field camp. I remember my professor at NIU being a little bit blown away that I was kicking ass in field camp. I got it. It came together. These other kids memorized things and they were better students. And so they prepared and they studied and they did the homework and things that I wasn't really doing. But all of it was for the end result of getting an A on the test and an A in the class, but it wasn't sinking in. They weren't, you know what I mean? It wasn't
Yeah, yeah.
practical to them.
Well,
I had
it's
that part.
different. Yeah, it's different. It's you're actually doing the field work. Like you're doing the
Right.
experimentation versus doing the uh, just the memorization of facts and regurgitation.
Yep.
So, you can think of the coursework as kind of like theoretical work,
Right.
and then the actual, when we did the field camps or when you do the lab work, that's the actual experimental work. So, I
Yeah.
mean,
The
that's what it means
application.
to, yeah, the application. And actually, when you look at science, the vast majority of scientists are experimentalists. It's the
Right.
application of the knowledge, going to the lab, going to the field, and gathering the resources that they need, or conducting experiments that they need, and then bringing it back and analyzing it and doing all sorts of stuff with it. But yeah,
And and
that's
and by the
interesting.
way, comedy is experimenting. It's experimental work, right? I mean, you see a lot of times when something hits the news media or whatever, and they latch onto some comedian said something horrible. It's usually not a well polished, well oiled, perfected bit that they're doing on stage at a show. It's usually an open mic where they're trying things out, right? And there's really an experimentation to getting out at the open mic, and you kind of throw something out there in the way
Mhm.
that you drew it up in your head and the way you writed it and the way you kind of polished it in your own mind. But I need the results of my experiment, which is the audience. I need them to say, yeah, we like that, or no, we didn't, or I was with you until you said that. Or I can look out and I see like, I'm losing them. They're starting to fade, or we're late in the evening and they're tired, or we're late in the evening and they're drunk, or I said this word instead of that word, even like when it comes to politics, for instance. I've got a joke that involves Trump, but it's really not a Trump joke. It's not a Trump punchline. There's a misdirection. And so I'm leading you down this sort of road of politics and Trump, and it's a tightrope that I'm walking, because if I bash him too much, there's going to be people in the room that are going to unplug from me. And then I see the other side kind of going, you better bash him. That's what they want.
Yep.
And so I'm leading you down this road, and then I'm going to completely change gears. And that's where the joke is. But I have to walk this tightrope of really getting you to go down this rabbit hole with me about Trump and about politics for a minute, and believing it. And then I've got to change gears on you. You know what I mean? So I'm watching them, and I'm sort of studying them scientifically and going, all right, what are they liking? What are they not? And you do that a bunch of times at the open mics, and you start to figure out what's working and what isn't, and you change it. You call an audible, and you sort of figure it out. So I think there's a science to it,
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, I think that you can take actually scientific thinking and kind of translate that or move that laterally to any aspect of life, wherever you end up, any sort of business. And obviously for you, within comedy, it has helped you to be a better comedian, right? To kind of read the audience a little bit more, and then so you experiment slightly, and then you adjust based off of the results of that experiment, which is essentially the level of laughter, the engagement from the audience, the body language. I'm assuming you've probably become very good at body language, learning how to read people as a comedian. Like, you have to be, right? Because you need to learn to read your audience. Otherwise, you're going to fail as a comedian. Because if they're not, I can just imagine that that's a very valuable thing to be able to do. Well, and go ahead. Yeah.
And there's a lot of variables in that experiment, right? I mean, it's what time of the evening it is. It's how early I'm going up versus how late. What did the comedian just before me say and do? And it's like sometimes you're not getting laughs, and it's like, yeah, my joke sucks. I got to fix this, right?
Yeah, right.
Or it's a great joke, but I stumbled over my words, or I took them a little bit too far down the Trump rabbit hole that I was referring to earlier, and I've upset a few people in the crowd. People are kind of drunk, and so or it's a group of college kids, or it's a group of older folks. So what's going to work? And that feedback. And what's really neat about it sometimes is there's like the long-term studies, like you would have of like the side effects of a drug, right? To say, all right, what's this going to do to me 10 years from now? So you get that in comedy, which is say, I've tried this joke a bunch of times, and here's what works and here's what doesn't. But then there's the very instant feedback, which you can get. You've got the little stick that's on fire, and you put it next to the thing, and either it flames up or it fizzles out or whatever, right? There's that old experiment. And so I get that instant feedback too, where, hey, this is a joke that normally really works. It's kind of not right now, and I'm seeing their faces, and what's going on here, right? And then adjusting on the fly, which I think is really fun too.
Have you ever done improv? Because I can imagine improv is probably some of the more difficult type of comedy to do, and it takes an incredible amount of like creativity. You have to practice. I mean, similar to rappers that freestyle, where they're just kind of creating on the fly.
Yep.
And I was just curious if you ever had done any of that yourself, or.
Since I've been doing comedy, it's not what I lean towards. I mean, I'll ad lib and kind of improv and riff and stuff on stage plenty, but I don't really flex that muscle a lot. Or I shouldn't say flex. I don't train that muscle so much. I did throughout like junior high and high school. I did some theater, and so you would do improv exercises in theater and things like that. But since I've been doing comedy, I haven't done anything really kind of specific or organized. It's just been leaning towards explicitly comedy.
That's interesting. Do you think maybe you would get a little bit more into? Is that something that maybe you want to try getting into a little bit more in the future, or are you pretty comfortable with kind of what you've got worked out?
I'm more comfortable in my space. I mean, I'm interested in doing it for the sake of like when a football player takes ballet. They're not interested in ballet. They're interested in the balance and the body mechanics and the strength and flexibility, right? So I would be interested in it for the sake of improving and honing my craft.
Okay.
But the specific improv side of it is less appealing to me as strictly being on stage and telling my jokes.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's I like that. So could you run me through a little bit of like how do you practice comedy? I'm curious as to, other than just getting up on stage a bunch of times in front of all different types of people and then just doing it over and over again. Because you have to obviously write it. You have to figure out something that you think would be funny. Maybe you have like a close group of friends that you kind of stress test whether or not it would be really funny, or you say jokes when you're out with friends to see if they laugh at first, and you're like, okay, maybe I could incorporate this as part of my routine at some point in the future. How exactly does that process all work?
All those things work. There's a buddy of ours in the local comedy scene, and we use his last name. I won't throw it out here. Let's say his last name is X. He performs his material on people all the time in conversation. Frankly, it's a little bit annoying, but we'll call it Xing. It's his name and Xing. So he'll perform his material on us. I mean, he'll hit you up next to you at the urinal and just start trying his jokes on you. You're like, dude, will you stop? So people certainly do that. Some people throw stuff out on Facebook and see kind of what's working, what's getting a reaction. Some people try their stuff in front of the mirror. Some people try their stuff out on their spouse or their significant other or whatever. And there's a spectrum of all those things. I do a little bit of all of that, but really, it's like a lot of things. The best way to do it is to just do it, right? The best way to get good at it is to just do it. I used to rock climb quite a bit years ago. And, you could get the little grip strength thing, and you can strengthen your grip strength in your forearms and whatever. And that's going to help you. But there's nothing like climbing to get better at climbing. And so for me, I got to get on stage. A lot of people really sit down with the notebook and they write and they look at it and they digest it. They go, what's funny? What isn't? Blah, blah, blah. And to me, that's a little bit like your hypothesis. You can put that all together, but now you're going to conduct that experiment and see what works, right? And so you can come up with the greatest hypothesis in the world, and you can come up with the greatest experiment in the world. It doesn't mean that you're going to prove your hypothesis, right? So you can sit down and you can hone what you think is a brilliant bit and take it to the stage, and your hypothesis does not pan out. It
just
doesn't
destroyed.
work.
Yeah,
no one laughs at
it.
It just doesn't work. Yeah. So for me, again, like the classroom, I don't want to spend a ton of time in the classroom going over my notes. I want to get into the lab and see what works. And that's just my style. So I like to get on stage with fairly virgin jokes and just try them out and see what works and see what doesn't. And then I'm taking my notes in my head as I'm doing it. And I'm going back and I'm going, all right, there was too much oxygen there, or there was, whatever. And I'll adjust my variables accordingly from there. That's how I do it anyway.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I'm curious as to, if something falls flat the first time that you try it, do you ever try it again and just maybe think that perhaps it was the audience? It wasn't the right audience for that particular type of joke.
Yep. Same thing, right?
This joke is. Go ahead.
Yeah, I got to isolate my variables, right?
Yeah,
so I got to say, why didn't that work? Yeah, sometimes the joke just sucks. But the only way for me to know that is to isolate the variables. I got to try it on another night where maybe I'm in a better mood, or I've had more sleep, or I'm not as drunk on stage, or maybe the audience is a little bit more or less drunk, or older or younger, or whatever. So yeah, usually I'll bring something out a handful of times before I'm able to kind of, digest that experiment and go, okay, the variable here, sadly, is my joke sucks. Like I gotta, and so then I'll try to maybe fix it. You tweak your experiment and conduct it again, and see if maybe you conducted your experiment poorly, right? There was a variable that I didn't account for, or whatever. So sometimes I'll retweak it, and I'll tweak it again. I'll retool it a little bit, but eventually sometimes you can kind of close the chapter on it and just go, it's not there, And then even that, usually I'll file that away. And sometimes 6 months later, you can revisit it, and the variable that's different now is me, right? I'm better at comedy now, I'd like to think, or something has happened in my life that I see things a little bit differently. And I realize, oh, the joke there isn't that I'm an idiot. The joke there is that this is what it's like to be a dad, right? And so I can take it in a little bit of a different direction. And then the audience is, you know, you got people in the crowd that are dads or whatever. I get that, right? So anyway.
Yeah, that's really interesting how, again, you're like applying the scientific method to how you approach comedy, and how you stress test all of these different types of variables, and then you formulate new hypotheses throughout old ones and kind of figure out what works. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So
I'm realizing even more as I'm telling you how much it is that I do it. I think some of it's a little bit second nature, right? It's like muscle memory to some extent. Do you think, I know you're the host here, but I want to ask you a question. Do you think that you can sort of bring people into science and make them really interested in it? Or do you think that the majority of people that are scientists are that way because they're sort of built like you and I are, which is to have this natural curiosity that you need to quench that thirst a little bit? So are you and I built a certain way that we like science, or could you take any old schmo and introduce them in the way that like that teacher did to me and get them to be interested in science? Have you given thought to that?
Yeah, it's something I've actually thought a lot about, because I really enjoy teaching and I love science and I love communicating science. And it troubles me how uninterested some people are in science, when it is arguably the most powerful tool that we've ever created. I mean, it's a process, it's a method that we've created. It started from philosophy, it's just thought, and we went out and we tested it, and then all of us, and we tested this particular process or method to the world, and then you all of a sudden are able to distill these truths, and from these truths you can create technologies, and these technologies make the world a better place, and that's all because of science. Right. So it's like the most important thing that we've ever created, and you have people walking around who don't really understand it, don't really appreciate it, and I think that that's a huge failing as a species. Because I mean, the reason why we're even able to have this conversation today, through the computer, is because somebody created the internet. Somebody put all of the effort into learning the science behind how you create the computers. So all the material science, all of the materials engineering, etc. I mean, it's just the foundations of it all are science, right?
Right.
And so when it comes to communicating science, I just feel as though that we could definitely do a better job. And you may not, like, for example, taking your example you were talking about earlier, I mean, you may not have even ended up in science. You've always been naturally curious, but you may not even had ended up in science if you had never taken that science class with that one professor. You may have ended up in business. What were you taking? Accounting, business?
Yep.
Something like, you may have done that, and the scientific community would have missed out on a productive member of society in that area. I mean, I'm not saying that you could have done that with business, but the scientific community would have missed out.
Right.
And when it comes to communicating the science, I think that the average person is naturally curious. I think that as children, we have crazy imaginations and we're super curious about the world. And some of us do a better job of carrying that on as we grow versus others. But I think that everyone has this inner scientist in them. It's just that the education system, the way it's presented to them, where it kind of squashes that out. They don't have the right professor to kind of push them in that particular area. And even if you're an adult and you didn't go into science, so this is going into, I think, like the second half of the question you asked, I believe that you can actually make people appreciate it, but it depends on how you communicate it to them.
Yes.
You can't just spit facts at them.
Yeah.
Because people will just kind of close off and be like, why do I need to know any of this? If you can somehow figure out how to make it relevant to their life, then they will open up and I think become more susceptible to assimilating some of the science into life, or just even being more appreciative of it. You have to make it applicable to their life, right? And you have to give them a reason to want to learn about science, because some people aren't naturally curious. They're just trying to figure out how to, let's say, make more money. I mean, that's a big thing in our society is, people have to pay bills, they have families to raise, etc. So I don't have a whole lot of free time. So why would I spend my free time learning about science? Just these kind of, curious, unless I'm curious about the world and it's fun and entertainment. But if I could figure out how to turn that free time into learning, because that's what they normally, people that are trying to get ahead, they're usually, if they have free time, it's not really spent recreationally, it's spent trying to figure out how to get themselves out of the situation and try to further get them ahead in life, because they're not comfortable where they're currently at. So if they could, for those individuals, if I could get to them and say, the free time that you do have, I want you to focus on science, but not just for the useless memorization of facts, but I'm going to tell you the science that will actually help to make your life better. And once you're able to do that and they're able to then improve their life, hopefully in the process they'll get more free time. And with that extra free time, maybe they'll be interested in assimilating more science into their free time. If they have children, perhaps they will be communicating this to their children about it.
You said a couple things that really stood out to me that I think are worth unpacking a little bit, because I genuinely asked you that question. I didn't come into it with an answer in my mind. It was like the way a kid asks mom, like, how does this work, right? I was like, let me see what John says, because I don't know, right? I hadn't drawn any kind of a conclusion yet. But you really sold me on the point of the natural curiosity that kids have. And I went, yeah, you know what? You're right. We're all kind of born scientists. Somehow or another, it sort of fades away a little bit when you're older. And that probably is a failing of the education system, right? And certainly parents can fail in that regard too. But if you get teachers that can engage kids early on and keep that curiosity and that sort of natural wonderment and that thirst for knowledge and a deeper understanding going, and engage them in a way that's fun and in a way that speaks to their specific learning styles, right? And just keep fanning that fire, right? I think at some point that fire just starts raging, and then you can't douse it after that, right? Yeah. But for other people, it sort of, it smolders a little bit and then it fizzles out a little bit. But you said that, and then you really sold me on that line of thinking. And then the relatability. I want to say that on your guys' Facebook page that you shared an article the other day that was about sort of scientists have a bit of a responsibility sometimes to kind of respond to some of these things, right? And to sort of put that
in the Nature article. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
And I think, sadly, that's a shortcoming of the scientific community, is the relatability. There's this intellectualism and there's this almost elitist nature that can happen sometimes among scientists, where it's like, we understand things that the common man doesn't. And I'm overselling that, right, for the sake of making this point. I don't think that scientists are inherently snooty or
some of us are. You're gonna find that in any industry, though, wherever you.
That's very true. That's very true. I think you probably, stop me if I'm wrong, I think you see that a little bit more on the physics side than on the geology side, a little bit more maybe. I remember a good friend of ours who's a physicist in a band. I'll leave it at that. You can probably figure out who I'm talking about.
Yes.
Without bringing up names, but he said that a little bit about it. It's sort of like, the better the physicists are, the more they tend to be that a little bit of elitist, like, I know this and you don't, sort of grovel at my feet. There's certainly a little bit of that. And then I think there's a little bit of this natural, who tends to want to be scientists in the first place and what their sort of makeup is in the first place, right? Who decides that they want to be the front man in a band versus who decides that they want to be a boxer, like what's your composition that you're into pugilism versus science versus a band versus an accountant, right? Some people are very introverted and some people are very outgoing. Some people want to be in a lab, sort of these lab rats in the dark, They don't want to talk to anybody, and they don't want to have this sort of a community outreach. And so that relatability, I think, is really important. I was thinking about this leading up to our conversation today. I remember, and this isn't to get political, just as an analogy, but I remember there was a shooting, and I want to say it was like, sort of white police officer, unarmed African-American, or maybe even unarmed African-American teen. And I want to say it was Ferguson. Don't quote me on that. But the point of it was this. The media sort of ran with this narrative of, oh, it was a white cop and an unarmed African-American. And scientifically, I look at it and go, okay, what were the circumstances? Was this racially motivated? Let's not jump to that conclusion. I'm open to that maybe that was the case, right? And then it was sort of the whole police department was Caucasian, and an overwhelming majority of the community was African American. And I was fascinated by that, right? It was like, okay, that is very interesting that the police department would not be more representative of the demographics in that community. And they had, like, again, there's people that might watch this or listen to this and jump down my throat on this, but I believe it was an African-American, like police chief or deputy chief or somebody high up, whatever, kind of, who was on that police department. And they came out, and a reporter sort of asked, or he was addressing it, and they were sort of saying, like, hey, how come you don't have more African-Americans in your police department? And he was like, we're not getting applications. Mm-hmm. It wasn't that our process, and maybe this is open to interpretation, so forgive the politics side of it. That's not where I'm trying to go with this. But it was, you could understand, hey, if you're getting 9 out of 10 applications are African-American, but only 1 out of 10 police officers are African-American, there's a problem with your system. But if 10 out of 10 applications you get are Caucasian in a community that's maybe 75% African-American, why is that? And the science of that was very fascinating to me, to say, okay, so what are we doing? And I apply that to the scientific community. What are the demographics of professional scientists, right? Why are there not more women in science, right? And you could make the argument, are they excluded? Are we not reaching out to them? Or are they less drawn to that? Do women have a sort of a biological predisposition to early childhood development, for instance, as opposed to science? Is there anything to back that claim? Or is it because of things like you buy the little lab kit with the test tubes for the boy and you buy the dolly for the girl?
Yeah.
What outreach is the scientific community doing? And I think that's where we're failing miserably, in terms of, like you said, not being so professorial, not being so elitist, not being so introverted lab rat, so to speak. Getting out there, engaging people in these Facebook discussions, engaging via podcasts like what you're doing, creating a Facebook page and a Twitter account and a website, and these things that are digestible that you're doing to engage non-scientists and say, look, there's a reason you think that, or you feel that, or when you flip this switch, that happens, or that you're predisposed to thinking coronavirus is all a hoax or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I think I see a very serious responsibility in the scientific community to say, hey, this is why diversity matters. This is why we do need female scientists, and we need African-American scientists, and we need Asian scientists, and we need short and tall and big and small. You need that diversity because you have to have folks who are maybe more outgoing like me, or people who are argumentative, or this diversity within the community where we understand science and the methodology and the skills, but we're inclined to maybe be the guy having a drink or a cigar and having that conversation with someone who doesn't think that way and engaging them. And I know I'm going on a bit of a rant or a sidebar here, but this is why I really love what you're doing. So I'm a fan. I love what you're doing, because a podcast, it's like, duh, of course there have to be podcasts like this, that someone who can stumble across this and go, I like what that guy had to say. That makes sense. That resonates. That clicks. He said it in a way like my college professor that got me in a way that didn't get someone else. It's so critical. I loved that article. I loved you sharing it. I love what you're doing.
Thank you. I certainly appreciate that. And I know you've been super supportive even ever since I started this a little over 2 years ago. And I certainly appreciate everything that you've done, sharing the posts and everything like that.
Of course.
And, obviously I couldn't agree more with what you were saying. And I think that as a community, the scientific community absolutely needs to do more. And that Nature article that recently just came out, that was a clarion call, if you will, to the scientific community, saying that we are not doing enough. Look at what's going on with all of the craziness with COVID-19, the coronavirus, and all of the disinformation, the conspiracy theories. It is absolutely bonkers. It's insane. I mean, you've had people coming out saying that it was engineered. It was engineered in a Wuhan lab. 5G causes it. And and then there's other stuff that's going around too. Even recently with those two doctors, which I know that you're very familiar with, as somebody coming from California, those two doctors with bogus statistics saying that, hey, we don't need to listen to the scientific community. This is no worse than a bad flu. All the shelter-in-place orders, that's all nonsense.
And that's where I live, by the way, specifically Bakersfield, California. I've been treated by the blonde-haired guy, Dr. Dan or Daniel. I've been treated by him.
That's crazy. And I'm assuming,
so I'm looking at this, I'm like, no, my town is in the news right now, and not in a good way.
Yeah, I can imagine that a lot of people in your community share their sentiments, though, that
yes.
They probably think that they were wrongly treated and that it's something coming from the MSM and it's fake news, or you're probably unfortunately seeing a lot of that, right?
A lot of it. And I think this is part of why I love so much what you're doing, and I want to see a whole crap ton more of it. And I want to see you just continue to explode and continue to dig in and do it and pay the dues. I know launching these things is tough. I know it takes time. I know it's like comedy. If you feel very defeated at times, it's like, God, why can't I get enough people to listen to this? I think it's an important message, or I think it's a funny joke, right? But
yeah,
seeing what's going on with this, I mean, this is a real big wake-up call as to how we got here, our underfunded education system, our underappreciated education system, even how we choose to spend our money and what we place value on, right? I mean, we're paying basketball players $100 million a year to throw a ball into a hoop, and it's fun to just sort of mindlessly drool and watch. And then you got people making minimum wage. They're our front line right now. I need the pimple-faced 19-year-old living with his mom and dad at Walmart putting hand sanitizer on the shelf so that I can get it. That's who I need right now, and we're not willing to pay those people. We need teachers to teach critical thinking, the basic foundations of science, to challenge things, but not challenge things like a conspiracy theorist where you say, I challenge this because this is what the mainstream media fed me.
Yeah, just to be contrarian.
I immediately reject it, right? Yeah, the contrarian. Yeah. I need to challenge it because that's what critical thinking should be, but I need to challenge it with a basis of science. And what we're seeing right now is at a time where access to information has never been greater in human history than it is right now. And by the time we finish this, it will be better than it was than when we started this. There will be that much more information out there, and it will be that much easier to obtain it. And yet, Dunning-Kruger effect is something I'm seeing at an all-time high. Confirmation bias at an all-time high. Cognitive dissonance at an all-time high. And when it comes to even these doctors from Bakersfield, it's a perfect example of appeal to authority. And if you understand the basic foundation of an argument and the basic foundations of science and Dunning-Kruger and confirmation bias and things, then you can understand what they did. And I don't know that it was deliberately misleading. In some cases, potentially, there is a political bias, it would seem, with both of these doctors potentially. And potentially a bias in terms of their own finances. Who knows? I don't want to just dismiss what they're saying based on those things. So maybe things were not deliberately misleading, unintentionally, or due to a lack of understanding of the statistics and the application of those statistics, it was misleading. And you need a scientist and you need a doctor to understand where they went wrong, but then they have to understand the arguments that they used, how they used them, and the fact that for a vast majority of people, there was an appeal to authority. Oh, well, this guy's a doctor, so he must know.
Yep.
You have to understand that and be able to break that down in a way that's relatable and is not this professorial, intellectual, elite a-hole. And you can get through to people and say, yes, they are doctors. You're right. But you don't go to your proctologist for a broken femur.
No. Yeah, they're not. I mean, they're emergency care doctors, or what exactly do you recall? What kind of physicians they were? They're MDs, but they're not epidemiologists. They're not virologists. They're
correct. MDs with time in the ED, and they run an urgent care. But one is a I think he's an ophthalmologist.
okay.
But to your point, yes, you are not an epidemiologist. You are not an infectious disease specialist or expert. You took a semester in school on infectious diseases?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I mean, like, to your point specifically. Okay, so let's break it down. What happened? So there absolutely was an appeal to authority, right? You have two guys who are dressed in scrubs to basically indicate to the audience that they are indeed MDs. They introduce themselves as doctors. They're wearing the scrubs. That is immediately to establish credibility in the eyes of whoever is viewing it, saying, I should know what I'm talking about. And then they go through very convincingly and they use statistics. And statistics are so easily manipulated, unfortunately, these days, unless you absolutely know what you're doing, which is why it's becoming increasingly important that people are learned or become more trained in stats. I mean, I just had a conversation recently with a woman who is working in a neuroscience lab on the East Coast. She's a doctor herself, and even at a journal level, we were talking about how important it is because of everything's going big data, even in science, how important even having in the peer review process a statistician, somebody who has a PhD in statistics, to just review the statistics in the paper, because most scientists are not experts in statistics, but they use statistics. So it's really, really important that people at least have a foundational, like on the public level, foundational understanding of how statistics should work. Because what happened with these gentlemen is they took statistics and words that sounded technical to the audience, and they just did a terrible analysis. And they just butchered the statistics, but the public didn't know this.
Right.
So you have the public looking at this, you have the appeal to authority because these individuals are credible. Then due to confirmation bias or motivated reasoning, all that information is coming right into them because that's what they want to hear for those individuals who want to open up society. And then you have something going viral, mainly helped by the news media. So I think Fox News scooped him up and said, let's kind of feed this to our entire audience. And it's one of the most watched news networks in the entire nation. Yeah. So then it just absolutely goes viral. And then the scientific community has to step in and push back super hard. And even when we do that, we had incredible pushback. You have these people who think that they know more than the scientific community on this, because you have these two doctors that they should know better. And I absolutely believe that they were motivated to do this because of financial reasons or because they wanted to open up the economy. It's just completely irresponsible. It goes against your oath to do no harm as a doctor when you step outside of your area of expertise and then you pretend to know what you're talking about, or you do a statistical analysis when you don't have a strong background in statistics. All of the mistakes it's insane. Like the mistakes that they made were basic statistical sampling mistakes. It's remarkable. And I had to push back super hard against some people when I was putting these articles online saying, hey, look, these individuals don't know what they're talking about. Yes, they are MDs, but their positions are being censured by physicians boards and other sorts of scientific communities, or I
Right.
should say groups, because they have no idea what they're talking about. And this is not the position of the community. The position of the community is that this is absolutely deadlier than the flu based off of the statistics or the numbers. And that we absolutely should be practicing social distancing, which includes the quarantining or the stay-at-home orders, because it helps the disease burden,
Right.
particularly when it comes to flattening that curve and making sure that society's healthcare systems don't become overwhelmed. But the amount of people that I encounter, and of course, you know that I was one of these people at one point because of my I should say, I was skeptical of vaccine safety and GMO safety for a while. So
Yep.
I thought that I knew more about the community so I can understand it. But to be on the flip side of this and observe the psychology and the extent to which these people kind of try to poke holes in the arguments, it's remarkable to me. I mean, some of these people are very bright, and it does take some work for me to pick through their arguments. But I just wish it was easier for people to change their minds. To be honest with you, Dan, it's remarkable to me how much people just want to stay fixed in their beliefs, and that they don't want to update them and they don't want to change it.
And by the way, the whole Facebook battle, I have since this whole thing has gone on. I'm sure. I mean, you and I are Facebook friends. I'm sure you've seen. I've gone hard in the paint.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
I appreciate
since,
it. The scientific community appreciates that.
but
Yeah.
and what's funny too is I'm going real hard in the paint, trying to say, look, this is what's going on. Here's the facts. Here's the statistics. Here's the figures. Here's what we know. Here's what we don't know. Here are some assumptions that we could probably intelligently draw from them, subject, caveat, and say we don't know and this and that. But I also have to. Here's where the outside of the scientific mindset comes into play. I have to consider for a second that if I go too hard, and sometimes you want to, I understand it. I get it. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not a statistician at all, but I understand it. Certainly, I would say better than your average bear. I've also been almost obsessively digesting the information, and most folks have read a couple of articles or seen what their pundit has to say to them, who has a motive for saying what they say and how they say it. I'm trying to digest some of the raw information and really understanding it at a sort of core level. And so there's times you just want to scream. You go, no, you idiot. Like it's, if I push too hard, they'll unfollow me.
Yeah.
They'll snooze me for 30 days. They will unfriend me. They'll block me. And the people that I'm trying most to get to, I've now lost them. So you have to step outside of science for a little bit and go, how do I engage this person? I've seen this a couple times too. A couple folks, I've had one person I don't know terribly well. Yeah, I really don't. We've been Facebook friends for a long time. It was this guy dated a girl that was a girl that I dated's best friends years ago. So we've known each other, but not well. And we have very differing viewpoints on a lot of things. And we've had some Facebook Messenger conversations that have gone really well.
Okay.
But I posted something in response to something on his page, and he just tore into me. And I was like, whoa, man, like we've had all these great conversations. What the hell? But it was this sort of need on Facebook to not be proven wrong and not be blasted and not be owned, right? So I said something on his page about, hey, I'll chat with you kind of privately, you know what I mean? And then privately, he said, hey, the people on my page are kind of more likely to agree with you. And I said, I don't need the numbers. I'm not interested in being backed up by now there's this majority where 9 out of 10 of your friends agree with me. And so then you're supposed to change your view because 9 out of 10 feel the way that I do. That's not how I'm going to win this debate with you. I'm going to win this debate with you by applying sound logic and reasoning and scientific method and facts and understanding, but in a way that's relatable to you where maybe I can convince you that way one-on-one. The numbers isn't going to be how I beat you here. And by the way, it's not winning and it's not beating, right? I want, I want to win in that I want you to see it my way, but it's not about checking the win-loss box for me. And the other
It's
thing
about getting at truth. I mean,
yes,
any sort
at
of
the core.
engagement, at the core of it, it's getting at truth. And as a society, there's a failing, and this definitely comes with the critical thinking, is when you engage on social media or when you're in groups and you have a difficult conversation, and it's like you got to have difficult conversations, right? Because you're never going to agree all the time. But when you have difficult conversations, you need to learn how to keep your emotions in check and then get to the facts, because both of you're not competing against one another, even though that's traditionally, historically how we have done things. You look at it as a competition, but it shouldn't really be looked at that way. It should be looked at the two of you are engaged in this dance to get to the truth, and you're without one another, you're not actually going to be able to do it as well if you were by yourself. That this other person is challenging your belief system, which is always difficult, but without them challenging it, neither of you may have the opportunity to become a better person at the end of it. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Like, it should be really viewed as this discovery or brainstorming session instead of a debate. And I hate the fact that we call it a debate, because calling it a debate makes it seem like it's a competition, when at the end of the day, what really should happen is that not somebody loses and somebody wins, but you both win. Like, the pie gets bigger. It's not a zero-sum game where, hey, you won and I lost. It's, even if I ended up having to admit defeat where my position was wrong and dismissed based off of sound arguments, sound logic, because I didn't have a complete worldview, I had my facts wrong. Even if that's the case where I was incorrect, I'm still better for it, right? Because I'm able to update my worldview. My worldview is now better based off the best evidence available. So both of us have won. Nobody lost.
But what's tough is what you're saying. I hear you and I agree 100%, is from a scientific mindset of, I want to learn something. I want to be proven wrong. I want to prove my hypothesis wrong. I mean, fundamentally, that's what we're doing, right? We have a hypothesis and you sort of desperately try to prove that wrong. And sort of in the absence of being able to prove it wrong, you sort of prove it correct, right? And that's what these conversations could and should be. Okay, what do you have for me? Change my mind, convince me. But people don't have that scientific mentality going into it. And so we're trying to correct. It's like, did you ever see Charles Barkley fixing his golf swing? If you've never seen it, okay.
No,
anybody watching or listening to this right now, pause and go watch Charles Barkley's golf swing. It is the ugliest thing you've ever seen in your life. And he was trying to fix it. Well, trying to fix a disgusting golf swing that you've had for 20 years is really hard to do. And with my own son, when we play sports in the backyard, he wants to be a pro right away. He wants to instantly catch the ball and tag somebody. No. You got to catch it first. Then we got to tag them. And then we got to break down how to catch it, right? I want you to learn it the right way from the get-go, because you'll learn it the right way at 7 years old, and you will dominate everybody that's 15 when you're 15. If I let you go from 7 to 15 doing it wrong because we're just having fun out in the backyard, and of course there's a line here, right? But then you're going to learn it wrong. And now at 15, I got to teach you how to do it the right way. It's so much harder. And that's, to me, the crux of what we're facing, right? Is you and I can think scientifically, but I'm trying to get someone who doesn't think scientifically to approach this not as winning an argument and confirming their bias, but to be enriched by learning something new. And by the way, I'm approaching the argument that way. In this case, it's pretty, you're not going to change my mind that coronavirus is no big deal. But yeah, we have to start there. And we're missing that already. They're already coming into it without a scientific approach. They're not trying to prove their hypothesis wrong. They're trying to win. And so as scientists, we need to potentially engage in sort of unscientific ways. You have to realize you're dealing with people who are not interested in learning something new. So our traditional way of saying, okay, here's the information, here's the statistics, and you're going to now change your mind, right? Wrong.
No, fact presentation, just strict fact presentation is never going to change anyone's mind.
It's not going to work.
No, it's not going to work.
And I want to say one more thing about the statistics. I've seen two things already that have been really upsetting to me. I shared something, and it was a friend of my wife's that was like, oh, your numbers are way wrong. And he did the numbers, right? It was, how many infected and how many dead, and division, right? You got your numerator, you got your denominator, and here is my percentage. But he never did the whoop, whoop with the decimal place to convert to percentage. Yeah. And so he presented this as like, 0.01%. There were two things I saw. 0.01% mortality rate. And I said, no, by your own math, you didn't convert to a percentage. So we're talking about a 1% mortality rate. And that is a big damn difference. Okay. Number one. And number two, he took it based on total US population. Well, you need to take it on the number of people sick, not the whole US population. You can't say a mortality rate based on people that have never been infected, right? Yeah. And those very basic math, statistics, and a scientific let me be proven wrong here as opposed to confirmation bias and Dunning-Kruger effect, those things were missing. And so this guy was dead set in, so basically no one's going to die. And it was like, oh my God, this is fundamentally wrong.
Yeah. What happened with this individual once you corrected and you pointed out that, hey, what you presented initially was not even a percentage? The true percentage is 1%. And then
I took a notebook and I did all the math.
Yeah.
I gave high estimates of death from flu. I gave low estimates. I gave a 10-year high and low. I gave the averages. I showed my whoop, whoop with the decimal point. I did the little dupe and the arrow and then the new one. I did all of it. I broke it down as monosyllabically as I could and I really tried to approach it from a place of not, aha, I'm right and you're wrong, dumbass.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work. It was sort of like, hey, check this out, see what you think. And it was on my wife's page. I'm not Facebook friends with the guy. So at some point, I felt he was digging in his heels enough I wasn't going to change his mind, and I backed off of it. But I tried to at least leave it out there and hope that maybe in the right set of circumstances, 2 whiskeys in tonight, maybe it gets into your brain a little bit if I can just plant the seed. So that's all I was able to do with it. So I don't know. And of course, this was relatively early on when people could say, hey, this is less deadly than the flu. And then you look at it now and you go, okay, well, there's more people dead than large estimates of flu deaths in a really bad year. So what now? Here's the other problem is now the goalposts have moved. So I can prove to you that this is, I say prove, that this has killed more people than the flu did since October of 2019. But now the goalpost moves because they say, well, the numbers are being over-reported. This is where I'm going to do it, John. Bang on my desk, shake the camera, make the big sound that you'll have to edit out later. And that's
that's a common tactic, moving the goalposts where they have unrealistic expectations. It really doesn't matter at the end of the day what you present to them because it's always not going to be good enough. And that's really unfortunate. But one thing that I wanted to say, and that I truly appreciate you, and there's other people too, but I appreciate the fact that you will engage and that you try to correct the wrongness when you see it. And I want to encourage you to continue to do that. And even if, and the reason why is because we have good evidence that even if you do not change that person's mind, there are going to be plenty of individuals who read through those threads and that are fence sitters. They don't engage, they won't even hit the like button, but they're going to sit there and they're going to read your thread. And they're going to be like, that makes sense. And then they're going to be on your side, but you'll never, ever know it.
God,
And
man, I sure hope you're right, because that gives you a little bit of fuel to keep kind of fighting the good fight. I engaged in one on another friend's page, and somebody, you know, with the whole, we're doing better than Italy. This is earlier on. It was like, no, we're not. If you benchmark it, we're really doing worse, and it's going to be worse. We're just 2 weeks behind. He couldn't understand this.
yeah,
And at some point, I don't know if you've done this, I turned off the notifications for the post, because I thought, that's it. I don't want to argue, and I don't want to blow up my
yeah,
friend's page, and I don't want to hear any more of this. I'm going to turn off the notifications. But I couldn't stop myself from going back to that friend's page and scrolling to the post and reading to see if they had posted anything else.
yeah,
And this is where that win mentality came into play. Exactly what you're saying. I kept seeing responses, and I kept smashing my fingertips with a hammer to not respond. And I had turned off the notifications, and I thought, I'm never going to convince him. But I just kept thinking, there's people on here that might be reading this, and I just can't allow them to be infected with your misinformation. I
yeah.
have to win. And I hate to use it in those terms, but I have to combat your
Yeah,
misinformation.
I wouldn't say it's winning. Yeah, it's the need to, you're seeing something that's wrong, and the need to not be a bystander when you
Right.
have the capability to go out and to correct it.
Yes.
And you're not, I mean, even going into it, you're not going to win that conversation. You know that. I mean, I engaged in a very lengthy conversation recently where I just happened to be the last person to respond. But that conversation was not win because I knew that she walked away from it having the same opinion that she did going into it. But I just felt that there was more information that needed to be shared. And you've probably seen when I engage, I like share a lot of links too, so that people have resources available to them to go read more if they want to. But anyway, yeah, continue your story. But I mean, you shouldn't view it as the need to win, but the need to not be a helpless bystander. The need to actually go out there and to combat the misinformation or the disinformation. So
That's where, when I have friends and family members who have been like, yo, chill, just chill on Facebook. And by the way, there's real life consequences for me to doing this, because particularly when things become political like this, if I argue the position that coronavirus is serious and we should take it seriously, then you are labeled. People make this whole gambit of assumptions of what your political beliefs are and who you're voting for. And so then it's like, oh, so you're okay with killing babies? And you're like, oh God, right? And so
yeah,
they'll make these wild leaps, right?
yeah,
And so I will alienate people, and I will frustrate people, and people will unfollow me and snooze me and unfriend and block me. And that hurts me as a comedian, because I'm trying to get my comedy out and grow my brand and grow my audience and my viewers. And I like to make people laugh. And if I alienate you, I'm shrinking my audience. I'm shrinking the number of people that will come to a show when I'm performing, or to an open mic I'm hosting or performing at. Or if I'm producing a show, they're not going to buy a ticket. So that hurts my pocketbook. If you delete me from Facebook, now you don't see that I'm running a show that you would normally like to come to, but you don't want to come to it now because you think I'm an a-hole because I have a different political or scientific view than you do. That hurts my pocketbook. It hurts my growth as a comedian. I don't want to do those things. But here's what I think is really particular about this case that we're facing right now, and broader to global warming as well, is if you want to believe that any number of conspiracy theories, whether it's moon landing or chemtrails, and I don't care, I use those just as examples. I hope nobody's going to inbox you that I'm an idiot for bringing those up. But if you want to believe in those things, that's fine, right? But when it comes to a scenario like this, where your lack of scientific understanding and statistical understanding has the potential to harm me and my family members and my friends and hundreds of thousands or millions of other people, because you're out there coughing on people and not wearing your mask and not washing your hands and whatever, or you listen to these ding-dong doctors in Bakersfield, you're putting lives at risk. And what we see is even the 2-week lag between us and Italy, people couldn't comprehend that. I got into a fight with a family member who I literally basically at the end of it was like, I don't want to have a relationship with you. Now this is extended family. But they were so insulting and condescending and attacking of my views. And I said, look, my daughter's at a higher risk. My mother-in-law is at a higher risk. My father-in-law is at a higher risk. I have to take this seriously. If you don't want to, fine. But the gist of it was, I was like, I'm not coming to a party at your house this weekend. As this was sort of starting to really ramp up. It was that weekend before everything kind of shut down.
Okay.
And I said, I'm not coming over. And they were sort of insulted and upset by that. And maybe as a scientist, I engaged scientifically. I'm not coming over. And my sort of human side didn't say, I'm not trying to offend you. I'm not trying to upset you. You're challenging my beliefs, and I can't come over and put my family at risk. And I don't want you to take that personally. I'm sorry. And I don't mean to challenge your views. Just please respect that for me and my family, this is the decision I'm making, and I'm not going to. And it begot this sort of fight that harmed our relationship. But I couldn't not have that fight. I couldn't disengage. It was like, listen, you can believe whatever the hell you want, but when your beliefs pose a threat to me and mine, I have to engage you. And he believed that we were handling it better than Italy. And I couldn't get through. No, we're just 2 weeks behind Italy. If you look at where Italy was on this date and look at where we are on this date, we're worse. And you keep doing that every day, we're worse. This is going to be really bad here, barring a change in our direction. If 2 weeks, if you couldn't understand 2 weeks, what hope do I have for global warming, where I've got maybe a 10-year delay?
Yeah, no,
right?
Absolutely.
And this to me is a really big canary in the coal mine for that.
Yeah, this is actually a great test, in my opinion, as awful as this is going through right now. I mean, there are a number of silver linings to this event, and the economy is going to suffer. Unfortunately, people are going to die, but this is a good stress test of the global community or global society's response to a major issue that revolves around science. Like, you have the scientific community saying one thing to you. How are you going to respond as a society to that? And luckily, we get to see the exponential growth curves and the flattening and all of that happen on a much shorter time scale versus something like global warming, where you're talking about decades to hundreds of years. And I'm really, really hoping that one of the things that come out of this is people will take the scientific community much more seriously than they did before. Because global warming, as you know, we have less than a decade to kind of get our act together. Otherwise, according to the scientific community, things are going to become very, very uncomfortable. I mean, I was just reading earlier today that, I can't remember the news outlet, but they're already projecting that this is going to be one of the most active hurricane seasons that we've ever seen. And events like this, you just had the fires burning down California not too long ago. You had literally like the apocalypse happening in Australia with all of the fires, followed by like gigantic thunderstorms and floods and like huge hail. And you just have all of these strange, really extreme weather events happening. And people don't seem to be really putting the pieces together, saying like, hey, this was all predicted decades ago by the scientific community that this was going to happen. And to fix this, it's going to take decades of work. if you look at the halftime of CO2 in the atmosphere. So, things, even if we shut everything off today, like as far as greenhouse gases go, the Earth would continue to warm for years because of everything that we've already released.
Right.
So, in my opinion, not only are we going to need to transition to renewable energy sources like non-carbon based energy sources, but then we're also going to have to develop technologies on a mass scale to actually pull carbon out of the atmosphere. Because I just don't see any other option at this point. Because that's how bad it's gotten. We've crossed all of these thresholds that scientists have warned us about, but we failed to act because we don't do very good. We're not very good at long-term planning or thinking for long-term, which is why a lot of people don't have retirements or they live paycheck to paycheck. But when it comes to something like this, like with global warming or even with the current pandemic that we're living through, people need to zoom out and see the bigger picture, because I just don't see any other way. And one other thing that I wanted to say back to your Facebook discussion with your family member, Dan, is that he wasn't challenging your belief system. You're acknowledging the facts coming from the scientific community, the best evidence available. And for all intensive purposes, these are scientific facts. So these are facts, aren't immutable facts, but these are facts based off of the best evidence available. And the best decisions are made from the best evidence available. So therefore, you have somebody who is not looking at the real facts, or they're misconstruing the data. Here you are looking at the scientific facts coming from the community. You're acknowledging them, and this person doesn't want to acknowledge the facts. So when you say he was challenging your beliefs, he wasn't. He was just refusing. He was refusing to acknowledge the facts because you're acknowledging the facts, and your kind of how you're conducting your life is formulated around the information that you're giving. It's not you like believing. You don't have to believe the facts.
Yeah.
It's you acknowledging the facts and saying, okay, this is where they lie. Therefore, I'm going to direct my life based off of the best available evidence that I have.
Right. That's a really, really important distinction that you made. And I'm glad you did, because yes, it feels in those moments like your belief systems are being challenged, but you have to separate that from what's really going on, because if you can't, you will respond with emotion. And we both got into that, where we were responding to each other with emotion, and you're feeling like your belief systems are being challenged. And so then you're sort of attacking, and there's name calling, and there's all this crap that you don't need. But the reality is, it's not the challenging of the belief systems and who and what I am at my core. It is the actual information. And as long as you can remember that distinction, your arguments will continue to be better. Whereas, I was just as guilty as him in terms of allowing my arguments to devolve into a place of name calling and all this sort of crap that you don't need.
And that doesn't help anybody.
No, it doesn't help anybody.
When the conversation gets to name calling, that's kind of when you should throw the towel in, because nothing is going to get accomplished, and it just makes neither of you look good then.
No, exactly. And so it's funny too, because we'll have to fix it, and it will be in part the realization on my part of here's how and why it went wrong, and that will allow me to fix it. You know what I mean? So that understanding of here's how and why that went wrong, right? And it will allow you to fix it. When you talk about global warming and the gauntlet that has been thrown down before the scientific community, my fear is that the scientific community can face that challenge head on, and we can look at it as the greatest challenge that the scientific community has ever faced, which is not science, but getting science to the people who need it, right? Mm-hmm. We can band together, and we can formulate we can get into the war room together, and we can come up with a plan for how to combat that. But it takes more than just us. We have to fix education, right? And if we're going to fix education, then we have to some extent fix politics, so that we can make sure that the money gets into the education system the way that it needs to, right? And that we can get the teachers into these classrooms that need to. There's nothing worse than when you see a teacher misleading youths based on their own They don't have the scientific knowledge, so they're faced with here's what the book says, and then you get this teacher that sort of goes rogue. Well, because of my political beliefs, I'm gonna tell the kids that this is what's up, and you're like, oh no, that's not what's in the books. And if I can't convince you to know that, then how can I convince you to teach the kids to have the tools that they need, so that when she and I or he and I meet in a Facebook conversation, that we can have that scientific approach towards getting knowledge and getting to the truth of it, right? Otherwise, I'm trying to fix Charles Barkley's golf swing, and the challenge may well be too great. What scares me about something like coronavirus and the moving goalpost or global warming is, if we succeed in flattening out the curve and we decrease the numbers, well, then they will say, see, it was no big deal. And you go, no, it was a big deal. We succeeded because of science. We succeeded because we canceled NFL and NBA and MLB, whatever. When it comes to global warming, if we can sequester greenhouse gases and we can remove them from the atmosphere, and we can make these improvements that allow us to not see this maximum devastation that we're fearful of, they will go, see, told you it was stupid. And so then still 10 years down the road, you have those folks are raising kids who come home from science class and go, Dad, look what I learned. And mom or dad go, well, that's dumb, and here's why. Let me tell you something about these idiots that thought global warming was real. And that's a bunch of, and by the way, I have to say this. You might have to, well, I don't give a shit. Do it. I keep my employer out of podcasting. I keep them off of the stage. And here's a good reason why. If you have enough of an audience to watch and listen to this podcast, someone will inevitably come along and go, okay, so dipshit in his garage over here said that global warming is bad and it's linked to man, but didn't you say he works for an oil and gas company? Yeah. And they will use that to dismantle my argument. And not,
so defend yourself. Let's hear it. Let's go for it.
Fuck. All right. That's not what I was that's not what I was planning
That's
on
fine.
doing.
Well, you can go whatever route you want.
I will a little bit. Here's what I'll say. You and I can maybe talk after this and discuss what you think is a right approach here. If my language, if my potty mouth and my curse words, there's a part of me that says if I curse on this podcast, you will have to potentially limit your audience of people that can watch it, right?
I would say it's mostly a more mature audience. I mean, this isn't something that's built for.
I get that, right? But also, kids, yeah. I don't want to be seen as crude or crass, where people will then dismiss what I or we are saying because I'm a jerk and whatever. At the same time, there's a part of me that says, guess what? If I come off as too professorial or elitist, you won't like me and you won't like what I have to say. But if I throw an F-bomb out there, I'm relatable to you.
Well, use whatever language you want. I mean, the only thing is I would say if you can communicate it with the least amount of expletives while still being relatable, I would take that approach.
I have that question. Let me throw it out there just rhetorically, if you will, maybe, is to say, is that the way that we do this? I don't know. But if we minimize the expletives, can I get to Joe in his living room in the Ozarks in a relatable enough way, right? Remember, this was the thing about George W. Bush. He was the guy you wanted to have a beer with.
Yeah.
And that's what we like about Trump to some extent, right? Is he's relatable. Yeah. He's the common man. Me personally, I didn't want a president that I could have a beer with. I wanted to have a president that was a million times smarter and more educated and disciplined and determined than me.
Yes.
But how does the voting block work? If my curse word can get to Billy Bob in the Ozarks, then let's leave it in. But I want to say this in defense of my position, for example. So you can bleep out my employer's name if you like, or you can leave it in. I don't care. It's not going to get back to them and get me fired. But I had a meeting. I'll send you. Be careful about this. I could, I don't know that I will, send you slides from a meeting this week. We
Okay.
report our carbon footprint. We report gas flaring. We report if there's spills. We do all these things, right? I was in a meeting this week, and the slide with the official company logo and name on it was that our official position is that we accept and do not dispute that the burning of fossil fuels contributes to global warming.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that we can pull the plug tomorrow, right? We need cars, we need laptops, we need phones, we need electricity. We need electricity so that we can create medicine,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can put people on ventilators, right? And we should transition to renewable resources and green energy, but we can't do it overnight. It can't be instantaneous, right? So I'm part of that problem. I get that. And so are you, and so is everybody listening to or watching this. They still have plastics in their refrigerator, right? But it was interesting to me to say, boy, I'm talking to people who don't believe in global warming, don't believe that it's real, don't believe it's happening at all, or don't believe that man is contributing to it. And here I am, a scientist, and here I am working for an oil and gas company who's admitting it.
Yep.
How can that not be a nail in the coffin for you to believe that it's not real? Our official position is it's real, and we're making changes to how we do our business to minimize our carbon footprint.
Yeah, no, it's interesting the disconnect there, and it's obviously not you, because you are a scientist that works for them that is a loud proponent of making changes in order to reduce our carbon footprint. But as you admitted, there are people, and I've observed this too, I won't name names, but we have other people from the geology program who ended up in oil and gas who have concocted all of these ideas that somehow the scientific community is mistaken about this, and that there are other explanations for why the planet is warming,
Right.
At least at the rate that it is. But really quickly, I actually want to defend you, because I feel as though that I need to. And so you work for oil and gas, and you admit that global warming obviously is something that society needs to be very concerned about. And I don't think that somehow anybody who works in the oil and gas industry, unless you are a denier of global warming, but if you work in the oil and gas industry, those are jobs that are needed, because we have an economy that is built on fossil fuels that we've done for the past 100 years. And we have all of this infrastructure that's not, as you admitted, going to go away overnight. And I think that any reasonable person would see that. You can't, this entire infrastructure, global infrastructure, is not going to go away overnight. Now, could we have transitioned to renewable or clean energy quicker, like from the past, or that we currently are? Is it possible? Absolutely. And the reason we have it is because of incredible political pressure and all the money being flown, being tossed around, all of the lobbying, etc. But the individuals who work in these positions should not be ridiculed, because they are valuable members of the society. A good portion of them probably realize that their jobs are either going to translate to something else more renewably energy related, because I'm assuming those companies still want to exist and make money, so they're going to be forced to do that through the marketplace, or they're going to leave and do something else. But in the meantime, why not support yourself and work that job, because the job is needed. If the job wasn't needed, there wouldn't be a position for you. You wouldn't be valued by the marketplace. So do that job, live your life, and then do whatever you can, obviously, to make changes internally, or to encourage or be outspoken about the global warming and the changes that need to happen. Obviously within reason, because you don't want your employer to look negatively upon you to the point of wanting to fire you. But society shouldn't look negatively or disparage individuals such as yourself who work in that particular field, just because you work there and we have an issue. You can't, because if we acknowledge that, we would say then everybody working in those jobs they should just quit. And
Right.
then it's
Tonight.
like society would collapse because we don't have the infrastructure. It's not possible to do that. If anything, society should be looking to government for changes, and then also supporting all of the renewable energy companies like R&D innovation. So that way in the marketplace, renewable energies can be competitive. So you get the price per kilowatt hour down low enough, and you make it more attractive of a energy source than oil and gas. Now you really can start the momentum, start the ball rolling, because you have marketplace competition, which unfortunately is the strongest type of competition that you can possibly have in our society, because particularly in the United States, we're incredibly capitalistic. We're so market-based. And as much as we want to detach what people do and the value that people have in our society from the marketplace, the sad fact is that people are intricately linked. Their value is tied to how valuable they are in the marketplace. And that includes all sorts of technologies. So if you can get the renewable energy technologies to be competitive in the marketplace to where industry who is buying energy says, I'm going to buy that clean energy because it's cheaper than the fossil fuel energy, then that's really when you can have a shift. And it can't happen overnight because that would be chaos, right? It'll be a slower transition, but it's important that it happens as quickly as we can possibly stomach it, because we do not have the time anymore. So that's what I
Yeah,
have to say
thank you. I
about that.
appreciate it, because
Yeah.
it is a common argument, right? I have a cousin who we debated it a bit, and he was sort of like, well, dude, look at you, you hypocrite. You work for an oil and gas company. And it was like, well, I mean, I understand your argument, but let's break that down, right? I mean, you cannot live tomorrow without oil and gas. You can't. There's plastics, there's electricity, we need the ventilators, you need gas to move your car. You know, the guy lives on a farm that he bought, and you're chopping down trees and you're burning a wood burning stove to heat your house. And so you're saying that your carbon footprint might be less than mine, and maybe that's true, but you hauled the wood to your house in your car, right? I mean, we do have to be practical. I do need to have a job, and you do need oil and gas right now, but I am willing to transition. I am willing to lose my job, and I am willing to be a part of the change within the company, right? Where I think you need government to some extent is we have to plan out how we do it methodically, right? My employer is willing to look for ways to offset things. I can go to my employer and say, what about this? And be heard. And we can look at it and see if it's a possible way to go about making these changes. I've got a real good Navy buddy from Morgantown, West Virginia, and his family, his father-in-law had a shop, and I think he also did something with like he welded something or fixed the wheels or the axles or whatever on coal cars. So
Okay.
he made or fixed or repaired or whatever the cars that hauled the coal in the coal mines, and as a result made good money doing it. And as a result, he and his wife were foster parents to countless number of kids. And so they did a lot of good in their community and saved a lot of people because of the money that they made through the fossil fuel industry. And if I talk about shutting down the fossil fuel industry, he'll come along and say, look, I've seen it happen. They close a mine. The local economy is so devastated. Your $300,000 home is suddenly worth $75,000, but you still owe $275 on it. You can't sell it. There's no one to buy it, which means you can't leave. There's no way for you to sell it and pay that mortgage plus the new mortgage or go bankrupt in the process. There's nowhere for you to now go, and your skills are outdated. What can you do? So you stay, but slowly the businesses pick up. And the people who had enough discretionary income can pick up and leave. And before you know it, you're stuck there. And there's no doctors, and there's no dentists.
There's no economy.
There's no economy. There's nothing to do. And he's got a valid concern. And that's where the theoretical and the hypothetical, that's where the rubber meets the road, right? That's where we do need, to some extent, government to come in and say, hey, what about plans to train these people to do things that are different, right? There were programs to take out of work coal miners and put them into IT.
Yeah.
You can stay there, stay in your community, stay in your house that you're maybe upside down in, but have a job and have income and start to rebuild that community. You guys are skilled workers. Let's get you welding the blades for wind farms. You know, I mean, this is where we do need that government, and that's where I think all the things that we've talked about today, we got to start to. The scientific community can do their part, but we have to start implementing changes at an earlier level. Right? We have to diagnose the problem and begin treating the underlying causes as opposed to scrambling to slap band-aids on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting to the root causes. And I mean, another thing too is I just want to highlight is just the complexity of the problem. I mean, it is so complex, and it's going to take solutions from all areas, all aspects of society in order to address it. And people can't just point one finger here, point one finger there, and say that's it. That's the problem that we're gonna address, and then that's gonna be it. It's like, no, then fixing one problem is going to create other problems. There are problems that are there that you may not even know that you have until you fix other problems, and you're finally able to pull back the layers and see that there are other problems. Not that you created new problems, but there were problems that you couldn't even see that were always there.
Right.
Right. Yeah, it's very complicated, and it's going to take some serious work, particularly because of our energy demands. The society that we have built from the fossil fuel industry is remarkable. The entire modern society is built more or less since the Industrial Revolution. Everything you see around you has been built gathering energy from fossil fuels, and we just cannot do that anymore because it's destroying our planet. And if we want to have a sustainable future, or a sustainable future or society where something that we can be proud of in the future, and that you don't have these catastrophic weather events, you don't have issues growing food, etc., we're going to need to innovate our way out of this, and also make some lifestyle changes too. I mean, we need new technology, but we also need to have a fundamental shift, in my opinion, of kind of how we view our place in the world. And one of those things, particularly when it comes to the United States, when we're talking about capitalism, I think capitalism has done a tremendous amount of things when it comes to lifting us out of poverty and bringing us towards prosperity. But we also, in my opinion, have this sickness with excessive consumption of material goods, social status. Social status is important, but how you define social status is even more important, in my opinion. Okay, so social status among primate groups is, as I said, very, very important. But one of the ways that we do that in our societies with stuff, you go out and you buy things, like useless things, more or less. And this is how you kind of display to other members of your primate group or society of what your social status is. I mean, and this has profound implications when it comes to like mate selection, basically like health, the health throughout your life, etc. So it's really, really important. But how we define our social status is even more important, in my opinion. And unfortunately, capitalism has made the average person think that in order to have an elevated social status, what you need to do is to consume nonsense. You need to have all of this nonsense and just consume. And I don't think that is a healthy way to approach life moving forward. I think that less is more, and that we really need to start to shift our society more towards the value, a qualitative value to certain aspects of our society versus quantitative, like moving away, detaching the materialism from value.
Oh yeah, less is more. Well, here you are with your fancy headset, libtard. Yeah, I know, I'm only joking. That's what I do, but you're spot on, man.
So, but anyway, we've been chatting for a while here. Is there anything else that you wanted to add? Otherwise, I think we'll just go ahead and wrap it up.
Yeah, this is probably one of your longer ones now, huh? I'm a chatty Cathy.
Yeah, it's been good.
people podcast with me and it goes longer than they intended. Usually, I think because they get lost in my eyes.
There might be something to that, and that wicked beard that you've got going on.
It is wicked.
Yeah.
Wicked as in gross. This beard is wicked like a hemorrhoid. Can you fade us out to "In Your Eyes" by I don't know who sings that song. Can that be our outro?
As long as you sing it. As long as you sing it.
Yeah, that way we can't get the copyright infringement. No, nothing on my end, man. This was a lot of fun. You and I are long overdue for a good catching up anyway. So this was cool that we kind of got a chance to do that, but let's do that again soon. And I can't say it enough, man. I love what you're doing, dude. I think you're posting great stuff. I love the way in which you're doing it, the way in which you're engaging people, the efforts that you're making. And stick with it, man. Thank you for having me on, dude.
Yeah, absolutely. And real quick too, let's do a little plug for Daniel Betts Comedy here. Where can they find you? Where are you?
Daniel Betts, Betts Comedy, on Facebook, on Instagram. They can find my website. It's a little bit outdated, but from the website you can find YouTube links, my bio, headshots, media pics, things like that. All that stuff's on there. And then Daniel Betts Comedy on YouTube. Please subscribe if you will, and then just check out some of my material and see if you like it. So find me on Facebook if you can. And
definitely make sure to check out the bio attached to this particular episode, because all the links will be in there as well. So, but yeah, Dan, thank you so much for coming on. It was great catching up with you. And for those of you tuning in, until next time.
Pleasure's all mine. Thanks, buddy.
Yep, take care.